Welcome to the Tidy Weekender podcast. This is Johnny Dangerous. Over the coming weeks, I'll be taking you on a journey and giving you an insight into how the Tidy Weekend has happened. We'll be hearing firsthand from the people who created the event, the DJs who entertained at the event, and the clubbers that attended the event. In this first episode, we'll be speaking to Richard Skaife about how the idea for the Tidy Weekender became a reality. I am talking to somebody who doesn't really need any introduction. However, without this person, you can safely say that there would be no Tidy Weekender. Richard Skaife, welcome to the Tidy Weekender podcast. How are things?
Good morning, Mr. Dangerous. It has been some time.
It certainly has been some. The last time I saw you was a Slinky event, and we went for something to eat by the riverside.
I remember it well. Yes, I was probably about 3 stone lighter, but that I remember well. That was also fun days.
It was. I'm sure we've all aged well, but you are known as being Mr. Tidy Weekender. So it is a fact that without you, there would be no Tidy Weekender. How did the idea come about?
Well, firstly, thank you for the accolade. It was a very special moment in time. To sort of rewind the clock back a little bit further than actually the Tidy Weekenders. I was working for a startup which was backed by one of the very big telco companies. It's called U-Boot, or U-Boot, as we used to say in the UK. And my job there was to spend mobile phone operators' money doing cool shit. And I'd approached a well-known trance music brand from Sheffield, and I'd had no love. So I thought, well, the other music genre I'm really a big fan of is hard house. I was was a big fan of places like Trade, which was just literally round the corner from me when I used to live in London. So I approached Trax and said, look, I've got all this money to spend. I'd like to help put on some really cool parties. And the Tidy Vision concept came to life. And we had these SMS screens, if anybody remember those. And we did probably, I think, like nearly 30 dates. And towards the end of the tour, Andy Pickles said to me, why don't you come and join us at Tidy? We spend an incredible amount of time working together, and I think you'd be a really sort of valuable addition to the team. And I was like, well, I live in London. And he was like, well, it's perfect. We need somebody in London. I said, well, I don't know anything about the music business. And he said, well, it's great. I think that's probably what we need. So I came with a really sort of fresh set of eyes to what Tidy Trax was doing, and of course it had built out this amazing community, and my role really at Tidy was to try and find interesting and exciting ways that we could do more with the brand than just do vinyl and CDs. And about the same time, I went to the mezzanine to see Tidy's 5th birthday, which was the first real sort of Tidy event, and I was like, wow, there's a ginormous community here. I need to really focus in on bringing an event to life which celebrates the amazing community, and also kind of reflects on the fact that the brand is just that little bit wonky. It's a bit weird. So kind of thought, right, what's the weirdest place we could take 3,000 plus ravers? And I'd been, as part of my U-Boot duties, to a quite conventional sort of weekender event down at Camber Sands. And, there wasn't really a community vibe and feel at this event. It was very sort of, you turn up, you do your party, you go home. So, we didn't go to Camber Sands. We went to Prestatyn, being very proud of our northern roots, and we had a look round, and it was at that moment in time for Tidy where everything we touched turned to gold. So there was no feeling of hesitancy. It was just like, shit, let's do it. This is perfect. This is kind of super weird. It's an unusual location. There's not a lot else happening here. Let's see if we can put on an event for our community. And it all came together really, really quickly. Looking back, It was probably 6 months from idea to first event, and we got a little over 2,500 people for the very first Tidy Weekender. So yeah, it was, I guess, a reflection of a moment in time, very supportive people in the shape of Andy Pickles and Amadeus Mozart, and this sort of, hell yeah, we can do it, and we did, and it was a lot of fun.
I remember it well, the first one. It was an amazing event. It was one of those standout events within the whole clubbing calendar. Yeah, there's been various weekenders before, like the Southport Weekender, etc., things like that, but this was something special. Let's just rewind a little bit more. Can you remember who you approached first with the idea, and what was their reaction when you first pitched it to them?
I think it was probably Andy Pickles, and it was very well received, because Andy, more than anybody, understood the power of the brand and the power of the community. And then there was a conversation with Amadeus, and in true Amadeus style, we immediately got into the details. It's like, oh God, look at those flagpoles. We could have tidy flags on those poles, and we'll do this crazy thing here, and this will be our, sort of little cheeky hat tip over there. So yeah, it like I said, it was. We had this sort of fearless resolve to everything that we wanted to do, and there was this period of time where. If we put out a record, then it just sold. If we put out a CD, it just sold. If we launched a digital music service, people just downloaded. So the brand was at this absolute peak. So for me, it was incredibly rewarding because, of course, for anybody who has to try and sell tickets, the biggest challenge really is having a community who are going to get behind you and support you. And that's a big part of what you've got to be thinking of as a promoter. And of course, I didn't really have to worry about that. That community was there. Really what I had to focus in on was just making the event shine and delivering a safe and fun event, rather than how the hell are we going to tell people about this party and is anybody going to turn up? I think those bits we already knew the answer to. What we were able to do then is just make the event as wonderful as it was.
So Tidy was then under Music Factory at the time. Was it difficult or was it easy to convince them to invest in the first event?
I honestly don't think they fully understood what we were actually taking on. I did some projections. I told them how much money we thought it was going to make. They knew that my background was putting on, events and understanding logistics. So I guess I had the full confidence of the senior folks in the family. But in terms of the longevity of what we're about to embark on, I don't think it was understood by them, and I think probably by us as well. I look now with immense affection to the fact that a Tidy Weekender is about to happen once again, and I don't think for a moment that any of us thought that it would be running, for the best part of 2 decades.
So what kind of obstacles or hurdles would you say that you came across during those initial discussions? What stumbling blocks, if any, or what spurred it on?
I think the only real negativity or area of concern was going to be around the attendees' behaviour. There was a dark side to hard house music, and I've seen it firsthand at clubs like Trade with horrible things like GHB, and we had to put a huge amount of focus on the safety of the attendees above and beyond what you would normally have to do at one of these weekender style events, because we were dealing with a very small number of people who really just wanted to push, the limits as to what really was kind of acceptable behaviour. So, that very small group of people were always the kind of the risk factor of doing this event, and that meant that we had to ensure that we had security who understood the challenges that they're going to be dealing with, and a medical team who were very well versed in dealing with those extremities. So it was I guess a reflection on some of the challenges we could potentially face, and there were people in the clubbing world who sort of said, this is going to turn out to be an absolute disaster. These people are not going to behave themselves. But the reality, is that didn't occur, and I don't know how many have taken place now, but they've all been delivered as safe events.
Okay, so how did you take it from concept to fruition then? Because it was an additional idea, and turning that idea into reality was a massive task.
Yeah, and like I said, it's very fortunate when you're a club promoter, which I guess, or an event promoter, that you don't have to worry about how you're going to get people to your event. Nobody knows who you are. You haven't got any database. So Amadeus started putting his creative juices to work, and instantly came up with a very sort of retro look and feel. I don't think we actually showed that first artwork to Pontins, because they would have probably had a heart attack. And of course, that the original artwork also then ran for event number 2. And of course, when we did the first one, we didn't really know if there was ever going to be a second one. It was only a reflection of the energy and the enthusiasm that we saw at the event. So quickly, the concept, came to life from a visual perspective, and then that starts to make it a lot easier, because you've got something in terms of a look and a feel. We then moved into programming the talent and getting those names on the flyer. And of course, the power of the Tidy brand meant that every single DJ wanted to perform at that event. And if they got other dates that were committed in their calendar, then, they were comfortable moving out for those dates and into our date. So we got the talent that we wanted for the first event. I can't remember if we actually did anything during the day. It's that long ago. I think the daytime activity may have just all been centered around the Queen Vic. I don't think we actually had a checkers or a rainbow moment at event number 1. I know we did like stalls and things like that, which opened during the day, and people were sort of just playing on the arcade machines. But and then I went sort of to look at what you would call vendor selection. So we already knew, who was going to be doing all the security side of things. We already knew who was going to be doing all the medical side. We then started to look at production partners who would make the venue look a little less like a holiday centre and more like a rave cave, and dropping those production partners in, and then starting to build out a team of people who were working around me and supporting me. So that, was additional sort of production managers and things like that. So, and also having all of the resources of the Music Factory Entertainment Group were incredibly helpful. Things which now you just wouldn't need, because at that time, people didn't actually book a ticket online. They called 01709 7100 22, I think was the number.
I think it was,
and you rang up. Yeah, you rang up, and you booked it on the phone. And I remember when we used to do sort of follow-on events, Tidy Weekender 2 and Tidy Weekender 3, and of course the FOMO, the fear of missing out, was so ginormous on those follow-on events. We used to crash the switchboard. We used to have to leak the information out, because clearly, I think there was maybe 10 telephone lines coming into the building, when all of a sudden 500 people, 1,000 people all want to book a ticket, you've got a Glastonbury moment in our own little way. So, having all of those resources were incredibly helpful because, you didn't send an email, you didn't go online. You picked up the phone and you rang a contact centre.
So let's talk about the lineups then, because they were pivotal to the success of the weekend, amongst many things. A lineup does attract your clubbers. So who and how was it decided what the original lineup would be, and did you have an initial lineup in mind when you first had this idea, and how close to that initial lineup was it?
I think we pretty much got everybody that we wanted. I mean, it's a long time ago, but I remember, we wanted to have music which reflected a journey. So we didn't want to start the night at 190 BPM. So Amadeus has always been really, really fanatical on getting that sort of programming and that transition of music. So, in a way, kind of replicating what people like Trade used to do very, very successfully. And also playing out some of the trancier elements of the tidy sound. So bringing people over like Signum, I'm pretty sure was on our first lineup. But then going all the way to, having sort of Paul Glasby there. So it was, a very large undertaking. There was obviously a lot of people who all needed to be programmed in at the same time. We didn't, from memory, sort of drip out the names of the talents. We went out with a flyer which had every artist on there. But again, the strength of the Tidy brand, ultimately meant that everybody, wanted to be playing at that show. There wasn't a sort of prove it to me and then I'll do the next one.
No, certainly not. No, it was one of those events where the minute people heard what was happening, I remember people phoning up saying, I want to play this weekender. Sorry, the lineup's done, There were a lot of big names who weren't too pleased that they'd missed out, but, that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess.
Yeah, like I say, it was an event which instantly captured the industry and the clubbers' imagination. And for me, who'd come to the industry as actually nothing more than a clubber, I mean, this was the guy who I managed to get myself into the VIP area at Gatecrasher at Loverton Hall, and I was stood next to Pete Tong and Paul Van Dyke, and I was like, I've made it. I've made it. I'm, these are my heroes. So for somebody who had come really relatively fresh to the industry and was a big fan of those artists, that was really, really humbling.
So let's talk about tickets then. When tickets went on sale for the first weekend, the social media was in its relative infancy, we can say. You had MySpace being the domineering platform, so to speak. You also had people communicating via MSN Messenger. Now, you had the Tidy board at your disposal. That was a brand new thing. Just how key was that platform in playing a successful part of the Tidy Weekenders?
Oh, it was a huge part. That was, the community. And it's quite funny now when you look at, sort of community. You've obviously got all of the sort of the big platforms, the Instagrams and the Facebooks and the Twitters of this world. But now you've got these ginormous sort of sub-communities which live on sites such as Reddit and the world that I'm now involved with. Ginormous amounts of conversation around, that category all takes place in places like Reddit, which ultimately is a message board. But the message board was, the social community, and it meant that you ultimately had really, really tight control over what posts were at the top, what people saw in their activity feed. People were going back to that site because it was, a place where they hung out. So you just didn't have that diversification of attention, which you've got now, where if you're a social media manager, You've got to worry about the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Reddit, the podcasts. Maybe you've got a clubhouse. It's like you've got 10 times the amount of platforms that you need to feed. And those platforms have all got sort of very different algorithms and, activity profiles. Whereas then, if you wanted to interact with Tidy or indeed Hard House, then you were going to the Tidy board or potentially sites like For Clubbers if you're in the north, or Harder Faster if you're in the south. So you pretty much had 3 locations in terms of digital media which you needed to feed. And if you were feeding those 3 locations, and one of them is your own property, then you effectively had every eyeball which is going to be available to communicate what you're doing.
Let's talk about the production. So at the first event, it was pretty basic by today's standards, but for back then, it was state of the art.
Yeah, I mean, production has just moved. I don't think we had any CD players. We might have had one CD player, which was just to deal with awkward people who might have a CD. So production quality and production standards now have moved to a completely new level. I mean, just things which were not technically possible then are now the norm. And things which a few years later were incredible standards of production and very expensive, like when we put a video wall in. That was ginormous. I mean, it came on the back of a truck, and it took many people a full day to assemble it. And that same piece of production now, you could probably fit it in a record box and it will go onto a screen. Or you could roll it up and it will be tiny and wouldn't be particularly expensive even to buy it. Whereas, that video wall that we put in was very expensive to hire and obviously very expensive to buy, and now would be sat in an antique shop.
Now, the sound levels were renowned at the Weekenders as well. A few of the neighbours were quite prone to complaining. How did you manage to tackle that?
Trying to keep the doors shut, having people running around with sound meters around the site. We ultimately needed to deliver a real oomph, to the people who were there, but at the same time, we couldn't convince everybody who lived locally to go somewhere else. We did have a few issues with neighbours. There wasn't a lot that we could do, from a soundproofing protection perspective, because of course we were in and out in terms of our use of the venue. It was a mixture of gathering all of the information and then being polite and persuasive with people who were complaining, who lived locally.
So Thursday nights at the Weekender, they would be spent packing the goodie bags, the toilet roll, the CDs, etc. Many of those things have now become collectible. You can find them on auction sites or...
Really? Oh my God.
Yeah, even on... Some of the CDs are going for like 30 quid. It's unbelievable. Now, other products came from sponsors, all right? One that stands out to mind and will always... stand out for me was a Japanese energy drink. Now, I can't remember the name of it. I think you're responsible for this, but it literally turned your urine neon yellow. It was like holding a
Oh my God!
Can you remember it?
I can't remember the name of it.
It was like holding a lightsaber when you went to the toilet. It was phenomenal. How on earth did you find that? Because we had crates of it for months after.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but I do remember it had a very peculiar taste to it.
And colour.
I don't know. You get offered some strange things to give away. I mean, we famously at U-Boot used to give away condoms and silver foil blankets.
Yeah.
And anybody who remembers the 5th birthday party leaving the mezzanine shivering will remember that I had a team of people putting silver blankets, just like you get when you'd run the London Marathon. And then if you got lucky, you got some condoms as well. I guess I was always really good at getting free things to give away to people.
So, I remember we had crates of that stuff for months. I think it even overran to the next weekend. We had that much of the stuff we could give it away. But yeah, they must have delivered the whole of the UK stock allowance to us for that weekend. But yeah, so getting the clubbers in was virtually a military operation. Now, most of the Tidy team will be down at the main gate welcoming the clubbers in. Can you remember how you felt the moment the gates opened at the first event? How did you feel seeing that?
A mixture of terrified and deeply relieved. Deeply relieved because we'd obviously managed to achieve all the production standards that we wanted to, and we'd had a sign-off from the venue that we were good to go. But then quite apprehensive in terms of what was going to happen, because of course during the build you've got quite high degrees of control over all of the external factors. It's a small team of people, and if anything starts to go wrong, then you can kind of nudge it in the right direction. Of course, when you've got several thousand people on your campsite, then you're dealing with all sorts of interesting scenarios, and I've seen things which will stay with me for the rest of my life. So it's apprehension, I guess, is proud, but you're apprehensive. You've got a lot of responsibility. You've got to make sure that these people have a fun but safe time, and you've got them with you for potentially 70 plus hours.
Let's rewind back to that opening night. The queue to get in the venue stretched right around the building. Okay, what thoughts ran through your head when you looked at it from the main stage? You saw clubbers filtering into the arena, that main arena, because you're on the main stage for most of the events.
There was a lot of things that we had to sort of consider. So I was very relaxed about it. I mean, I think most people were used to queuing to get into a nightclub. Hopefully nobody had to queue for particularly that long. Certainly not sort of Gate Crasher or Magna 5 or Magna 7, length queues. I guess immensely satisfying seeing all of these people getting ready. And at the same time, you want to run a very efficient front of house. You want to get people in as quickly as possible. But, you've also got to be, very aware of what happens in nightclubs. And, you wear a lot of responsibility there to make sure that, people have a safe time when they're with you.
As well as trying to be everywhere at the same time, you're also the master of ceremonies on the main stage, keeping the crowd going at every opportunity. Did anything ever go wrong?
No, I don't think actually it did. I mean, there was many times where I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I would be dealing with something which was arguably a lot more important than me getting on a microphone and introducing a DJ. And sometimes I would sort of have to make a decision as to whether I could actually leave that situation and go back to the main stage, or if I was just relatively oblivious of timings because somebody was in my ear talking about the fact that they didn't like the towels they got, or the toilet paper was not satisfactory, and then you've got to make a decision whether you want to be rude and sort of say, hey, look, I'll come back to you. But no, I don't think there was anything which went wrong. It's just an incredibly hectic lead up to the show, during the show, and even after the show as well.
Last set, main stage, Sunday night, the first weekender was pretty emotional for everyone. The Tidy team stood on the stage. Andy and yourself spoke to the crowd. It must have been pretty emotional at that point. For you, it was one of your biggest achievements to date, surely?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't remember an awful lot about those sort of closing moments, and that's not being disrespectful to the closing moments. I kind of have to go back and watch the limited amount of video footage that was captured to kind of recalibrate it all. And I say I don't remember because it was just such a whirlwind. That entire event, I was sleeping 2 to 3 hours a day. I think I was sleeping on the site as well. Hadn't actually got into the habit of booking a hotel away from the site. So I was getting limited amounts of sleep. My feet felt like they'd been smashed with hammers, because I was probably doing 35,000 steps a day. Now, of course, with an Apple Watch and an iPhone, I'd know exactly how many steps I was doing, and I probably couldn't do it anymore. But I mean, it was just brutal in terms of the amount of ground you were covering, the amount of people you were interacting with, the amount of different situations. So yeah, I don't remember an awful lot, and I don't even remember if we had an after party at the first event. I just can't remember.
I don't think we did. I think on the Saturday there was the Vicious Circle after party, but I don't recall on the Sunday there being one.
No, I mean, that used to be for me the highlight of the event. Sounds super weird, and not because anything sort of particularly spectacular used to happen at the after parties. But we used to take over room 2, and it would be like 100, 150 people who'd worked on the show, who were connected into the DJs. We just took the pace down. We used to play a bit of funky house, a bit of old classics, but it was just a nice way for people to, decompress and have a good chat and a catch up. And at that point, everybody had, sort of headed back to their chalets. And we'd secured the venue, so we haven't got any venue responsibilities. And then everything which was happening on the site, became a mixture of responsibility for our security team and the Pontins security team and the medical team. So we, as the kind of production and event people, used to be able to sort of unwind a little bit and have a few drinks and, just chill out. So that used to be a real highlight of the show, just because you got to enjoy in a different way the show.
What went through your head in the days following that first weekend? Because you didn't actually get back to Tidy HQ until the end of the week. You were there stripping the event down as well. The gamble had paid off after the first weekender, we know that. How soon after that weekender was weekender 2 booked?
I think it was actually being booked whilst we were still on the site. We kind of shook hands with Pontins probably on the Monday or the Tuesday, but we teased on the Sunday, that we were going to be coming back and we were going to do it again. We'd been having a lot of very regular dialogue with the site during the event, in terms of checking in and how everything was going, if they'd got any concerns, if there was anything we needed to put more focus in on. So they were, saying to us, this has been great, we've really enjoyed it. Would you be, looking to do another one? Is this a one-off? So we already had in our mind that there was going to be another one internally, and with our friends at Pontins at the time. And of course, as we were coming towards the end of the event, all we were hearing from the clubbers was, when's the next one? Are you going to do it again? So we'd had a pretty strong signal from everybody that it was something which was going to happen again.
So second time round, it was far more easier to convince Music Factory that this was a good event to be putting on.
Oh yeah, I mean that was I wouldn't say the first one was particularly hard, just because we were in this really lucky place of we hadn't had any failures, of significance. Everything the Tidy brand had done had turned to gold. The 5th birthday party, the Tidy Vision tours, the spectacular sales from the vinyl and the CDs. So we have kind of full confidence, and I guess confidence is a big part of success. So there was never really that hesitancy. But when we started to look at the second one, it was more of a hell yeah, rather than oh yeah.
Now, the first couple of weekenders didn't have a theme as such. I don't think it was until weekend 3 that a big red bus was commandeered to ferry clubbers from the train station at Prestatyn to the Pontins site with the Tidy Boys on board, of course. Now, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at the meter when that was pitched.
Well, that is a really funny story.
Go on then.
So, yeah, I mean, there wasn't a theme per se. I guess it was nudity and flags were the theme. And we made a big thing of the flags because we superimposed those orange flags onto those flagpoles for the first piece of artwork, if memory serves me well. And then we did the same with green for the second one.
With the naked bikers.
And then Tidy Weekender number 3 kind of was playing on the buses. So it kind of had that, holiday camp carry on.
Because that was the actual venue, wasn't it, where they filmed that so on the buses film with the holiday?
Yeah, exactly. So here's a really weird thing. So Amadeus goes through his library of madness and irrelevance and finds this picture and, puts Tidy Weekender 3 on the side of the bus. And that is the artwork. And we used to laugh and joke and say, wouldn't it be funny if we, had a bus? And I was like, yeah, but, the bus would kind of have to look like the artwork. Otherwise, it's going to look a bit weird just driving a Prestatyn bus around or a London red bus. So, yeah, we were never going to do a bus. And then we were driving through one of the coastal roads. And I can't remember who I was with at the time. It may have been Chris Hanley, who was one of our events team, or Mike Chalmers. But we saw that bus. Not the exact bus, but a bus which looked almost identical. And we're like, we found the bus. So we managed to have this bus, which all we had to do was put Tidy Weekender 3 on the cream. And it looks identical to the bus in the artwork. But we didn't have the bus when we did the artwork. That was just a lucky find.
How were the themes decided then? Because you had the Tidy Army, you had the Dirty Weekender, there was quite a few. You had the Western Weekender, the Wild Wild West.
It was always a team effort. We used to, all sort of decompress. I wouldn't say we had like a schedule. We didn't sort of go, in year 4... it's Space Invaders, and then it's There wasn't any of that. It used to kind of be a reflection of what we'd just done, and then kind of looking at the next one. And then it started to get to a point where, we had the theme lined up for the next event. So we kind of then used to do the pre-announcements at the event. But that took a little bit of time before we got to that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was a big team effort. And listen, I always feel deeply humbled when people pat me on the back and say, wow, but the reflection is this. If it wasn't for the amazing work of people like Darren Hicks with the security and the quality of people that he brought to look after people so that people were safe and respected, and Pete Jones and Victoria, the medics, the production teams, all of the management, the kind of roll your sleeves up mindset of everybody from Tidy and Music Factory, people who used to work in the office, not having anything to do with Tidy day to day, will be there working in the shop. So, whilst I used to get a lot of the halo effect in terms of putting the event on, it was the people who programmed the talent in. It was the people who manned the phones. It was the people who patted people down on the way in and made sure that they were safe, that ultimately all contributed to the success of the Tidy Weekenders. So, yeah, it's a great buzz getting up on stage and, sort of putting your hands up and saying, yeah, that we did it. But you are ultimately a figurehead. In the same way that Amadeus and Andy are figureheads, but they've always been deeply respectful of all the people that are around them, which have created that amazing success. So, I'm always delighted to kind of, take the compliments who isn't. But, I always want to convey that success was only achievable because of the amazing people who got behind what we were doing, who said, yeah, Richard, that sounds like a good idea. confident you can do it, and supported me, because if I didn't have that support from the Andy and the Amadeuses and all of that amazing team of people that we brought together, there would have never been a Tidy Weekender.
Now, as the Weekenders grew, so did the budgets to put them on, because they got more theatrical. Can you remember what the biggest budget was whilst you were there at Tidy? What was the biggest cost to put on a Weekender? It's going to have changed between then and now, but just to give people an idea of back then, what you were looking at.
I can't remember the exact numbers, because it is 15 years ago. I can't remember how much I spent on lunch yesterday. But I remember the biggest extravagance, and that was the Tidy Weekender, or the Tidy Army, and that was the zip line, which I think was used for all of a minute for Andy and Amadeus to fulfil their childhood boy fantasies of being in the army, and to have weightlessness. That was a true extravagance. Only they got to do it. But yeah, we didn't use it for very long, and it did cost quite a lot of money to do it.
24 Weekenders later, after lockdown, the 25th Weekender is going to take place in July 2022. Did you ever think what you created back then, all those years ago, would still be going strong today?
No, of course not. I think, life is about meeting interesting people. I never thought I'd be working in the music industry, so let alone be responsible for delivering an event format which has stood the test of time. It shows the power of the community which has evolved. Some people are still part of that community, and of course new people have come, and some people have moved on. But it shows that strength, and that's ultimately what we built that event around, was community. So I guess with hindsight, I could look and say, yeah, of course, communities stay together. Meaningful, life-changing connections were made at those events. But I guess when you're there, you don't necessarily sort of look at it in that way. It's only when you get to stand back, look, that you realise that you've achieved something which was very, very special. And it's quite funny, actually, that the next Weekender is called Tidyland. And I've just returned from Miami as part of my World These Days. I did an event in Miami, which was actually a professional business event, but we gave it some of that magic that we used to have in the dance music shows. It was called Wonderland.
Wow.
And
Karma.
I saw elements of that, because it's the first time people have really been able to meet as an industry en masse. So it had those elements where there were people saying, I've made relationships which I think will last a lifetime, and now I can kind of stand back and say, I think this is actually going to stand the test of time. What we've got here is community. What we've got here are life-changing memories and an afterglow which is still continuing. We had a piece in The Guardian yesterday about the event in Miami. So, you get to see those similar characteristics, and then you recognise that you've created something special. But I guess when you're there at the time, and you're in the thick of it, you don't necessarily see it. It's only when you've done it maybe once or twice before that the next time you get the opportunity to do it, you actually get to see it.
Now, celebrity guests were booked for the Weekenders. Ones off the top of my head I can remember are Timmy Mallet, Pat Sharp, and also the late, great Howard Marks. Now, I think it was Lee Haslam and myself that went to pick him up from the station, and the first thing he did when he got off the train was spark up, because obviously he couldn't smoke on public transport. How did you decide who would appear? Because it was such a varied array of guests, from retro kids TV to the likes of Howard Marks, Mr. Nice.
Yeah, I guess we wanted people who'd got a kind of a cultness around them, regardless of how kitsch that was. So sometimes, with the case of Howard Marks, it was a cultness and coolness. Whereas, when we had Keith Chegwin, rest in peace, Keith was just one of those people who was known by everybody. His career had gone sideways. He was somewhat of an extravagant character, and we'd heard that his adult show, shall we say, was very, very different from his breakfast television persona.
Yeah.
So, that for me was probably my favourite guest, because he bounced up on stage and his opening line was "Hands up, who thinks I'm a CUNT," which you never forget.
Of course you wouldn't.
Wow, he's shameless.
So if you could have one celebrity at the Weekender, who would that be?
I don't know, actually. That's a really difficult one. I guess times have changed as well. I think like a lot of the people, who we would have looked at then, we wouldn't necessarily look at now. That's a really difficult one. I think we probably got we only had a certain budget, so it's ridiculous for me to sit there and say, "Oh, would have liked Prince to come along." There was only so much money you could sort of play with. So I think in terms of what we had to play with from a budgeting perspective, I think we got everybody we wanted. And we got some, we got
corkers.
People who were, people, our audience had grown up with. And they were true celebrities. Very much with the exception of Harold Marks. Very much domestic celebrities. If you were visiting us from Australia or Japan, and you were watching Jeffrey, Zippy and Bungle on a Saturday, was it a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon?
I think it would be either.
Yeah, if you're watching them, you were probably thinking, what the hell is this? Because they would have not meant a great deal to you. But if you've grown up with Rainbow as a child, then, those were quite precious moments.
So which has been your favourite Weekender and why?
Tidy Weekender number one, because obviously it was the first event that we did, and we got to prove the format. And then I think probably Tidy Army. I think that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was my
and the
favourite.
reason being, it was such an easy theme for people to get into. So the adoption of the theme was really high. Everybody could go and find some camo gear and put some face paint on and buy a green hat.
Yeah.
And some people went to incredible lengths, and some people just bought into it, at a relatively low level. But we had just really high levels of adoption of the theme. And it was a true reflection of what Tidy was. It was a community, but it was an army.
Tell us your Weekender nightmare. What went wrong for you? What can you remember that went wrong? Nothing might have gone wrong, but what was your Weekender nightmare?
I never really had a nightmare.
So not the golf cart ploughing into a chalet, then that was...
No, I've had some near misses, I guess, and they were generally involving people who'd push themselves to excess, and seeing the sort of state that they are in, and being quite sort of frustrated and upset for them at the same time. Those things always sort of put a bit of a dampener on things, and they also used to chew up a huge amount of your time. And some days, the next day, you'd see them doing it again, and you were like, "What an asshole!"
Yeah.
You just chewed up 5 people's time for like several hours, and you don't kind of reflect on your behaviour. So listen, I'm all for a party, but you've got to know your limits. And there were some people who just used to push it that little bit too far, and then we unfortunately had to wear a lot of the outcomes of their behaviour. So those for me were always the most frustrating moments of doing an event of that time, because whilst ever you're dealing with that, you're not dealing with something else. And, when it's taking up three security staff's time, the event manager's time, and 2 medics, then, that's just not cool. And we didn't used to see an awful lot of it, and it used to generally be the same people. And sometimes you would bar them from the event and they'd still manage to find their way on. So they were just like persistent bad stains on the, on the management of what on the whole was a very, very, clean event.
Let me ask you something finally. Had you have stayed at Tidy, where do you think you would have taken the events? Where would you have taken them to the next stage? What would have been the next stage?
I don't think I would have pushed to do as many Tidy weekenders. For me, less is more. And that's actually been one of my learnings that I've managed to take from Tidy and transpose to the world I'm in now. So I just did this very big show in Miami, Wonderland, getting offers to take the format all around the world, massively expand on the format, take a much bigger convention center in Miami. I reflected on some of the mistakes that were made at Tidy and said, no. Wonderland is going to be once a year. It's going to be in Miami, and we're going to sell the show out. We sold the first one out. We'll sell the second one out. We'll just sell it out quicker, rather than sort of land and expand. And I think that was probably where I would have done things differently. And I took actually elements of that from people like Gatecrasher, who at their peak were the absolute brand guardians. At their demise, they were the slags of the industry, but at their peak, they were true perfectionists in terms of what they would put their name on and what they'd be associated with. And I think that's probably where, Tidy took a few missteps. And also there was a change in musical tastes as well. And some people grew out of it and not enough people grew into it. So it's not all, sort of the new management who need to kind of, hold the responsibility on that. Some of it was a reflection of market trends. Sure. But my learning there was, you've got a gem, keep polishing that gem, just make it better, make it more desirable, rather than trying to have more and more gems. Because I think that some of that desire to do more and more events ultimately will have led to some of the lack of enthusiasm that some of the events ultimately ended up seeing.
So that was then. This is now. Richard Skaife, what are you up to these days? Give us a brief overview. What do you do?
Yeah, I'm a venture capitalist these days. I invest exclusively into psychedelic medicine. So I spend my day generally talking with scientists, sometimes computer nerds, around how we can develop new psychedelics, but using them in strictly medical settings. So this is taking, drugs that we will have all probably heard of, but applying them alongside therapy. So that could be LSD, that could be magic mushrooms, psilocybin, MDMA, ecstasy. And I've been very, very lucky to join this industry when it was super early and watch some of the companies that we've invested into become multi-billion-dollar companies.
Wow.
We also own the biggest media property in the space, so we develop all of the news and the content for the industry. And we started off life doing virtual events because that business was born at the beginning of a pandemic. Yep. And we did our first event in November in Miami under the Wonderland name. A mixture of professional investing into what we would call psychedelic medicine life science companies. So very heavy on the science, but I've also got interest in the media space, technology companies who provide software into clinics, artificial intelligence companies who use AI to develop new methods of discovering new drugs. So that's what I do day to day. But the funny thing is, if I hadn't have had my experience and exposure inside the electronic music space, I don't think it's a category that I would have been drawn to. And one of the things that I talk quite regularly about is what we call in the industry set and setting. So, is somebody going to go to a hospital to receive these treatments, or are they going to go to a luxury resort to receive these treatments? And what we know is set and setting is really, really important for the effectiveness of therapy. And what I saw in the Tidy days was these immense communities which were created through set and setting. People who created lifelong, meaningful friendships through those events. And of course, there was an underlying theme to a lot of that community building. So I think I look and say with great affection that, what I did as, at Tidy has a huge impact on what I'm doing now. And sometimes the worlds do bump in the most unusual of settings. And I'll give you a great example. And it goes down as one of my most hilarious moments of 2021. I'm talking to a private bank in Los Angeles who specialize in working with commercial clients. Talking to the guy there, pretty senior, and he says, are you Richard Skaife from Tidy?
No way.
The same Richard Skaife. I'm like, yes. He says, I am like the biggest Hard House fan. I'm like, really? Like, you're in Los Angeles? He's like, yeah. I'm like, I was into this. He says, and Tripoli Trax and Nucleus, and this is my favourite record. And he's like, did you get to meet these people? I'm like, yeah, that's like who I used to work next to. And he's like, wow, that's absolutely incredible. Well, listen, I want you to know as a bank, we're really happy to provide banking to your clients. And I met him actually for the first time in Miami. He flew over to Miami to come to the show. And we spent most of our time not talking about business and banking, but Hard House.
Wow.
I think that for me was like a really special, if not super weird, interaction, because it just shows how far what we did actually went.
What a small world we live in.
Absolutely.
Listen, Richard, on behalf of everyone who has ever been involved with a Tidy Weekender, who has ever performed at a Tidy Weekender or attended one, we salute you. We thank you. Without you, this never would have happened.
Well, thank you very much, Johnny Dangerous, and without all of the wonderful people who were so confident in my ability to deliver a groundbreaking event, it would have never happened either. But thank you for your kind words.
Thanks for listening to the Tidy Weekender podcast. Please favourite us so you don't miss the next episode.